The moment felt almost unreal, as if the usual rhythm of a Monday morning had been hijacked by something out of a movie. Did I just hear him speaking Japanese? One employee whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief, her eyes wide and fixed on the unassuming man in the corner. The air inside Kingston Enterprises was filled with the familiar hum of printers and the steady tapping of keyboards, the rich aroma of fresh coffee drifting from the break room. But in that quiet lobby corner, a scene was unfolding that would shatter everyone's idea of who James Carter really was. There he stood, mop in hand, his navy blue janitor's uniform slightly damp from his morning rounds. When the glass door slid open and a group of Japanese clients stepped inside, their suits crisp, their eyes scanning the lobby for their host. Without a single moment of hesitation, James straightened his posture, offered a polite bow, and began speaking in flawless Japanese, his voice carrying a respectful warmth that instantly eased a stranger's guarded expressions. Their faces lit up with surprise, their eyes widening before softening into smiles. Not the polite smiles of business etiquette, but the genuine kind, the kind that said, "This man understands us." For a few minutes, they conversed as if old acquaintances, laughter bubbling between the formalities, and it was clear that whatever he was saying was not from a translation app or a memorized script. It was natural, lived in, authentic. Then, as the Japanese clients moved toward the reception desk, the lobby doors opened again, this time revealing a delivery driver carrying a package far too heavy for one person. His forehead glistened with sweat, and as he tried to explain something about the delivery, his words came out in rapid, desperate French, his accent betraying a sense of urgency. Most people would have nodded awkwardly or simply pointed him toward the front desk, but James didn't miss a beat. He turned toward the man and answered him in smooth, unhurried French, his words rolling off his tongue like a song he'd known all his life. The driver's tense shoulders relaxed instantly, and he grinned with relief, handing James a delivery form as if they had known each other for years. By now, the quiet murmur of the lobby had shifted into a hushed awe. One by one, employees began drifting toward the scene, peeking over cubicle walls or pretending to take a coffee break just to get closer. Some stood frozen in the hallway, their eyes darting between James and their colleagues, silently asking, "Are you seeing this too?" Phones were discreetly raised, recording the janitor, the man they walked past every day without a second thought, now holding effortless conversations in languages that most of them couldn't even identify. The mop bucket sat abandoned beside him, its soapy water reflecting the fluorescent lights, but James didn't seem to notice. He was entirely absorbed in helping, translating, and connecting. It wasn't flashy or boastful. If anything, there was a humility in his posture, as though this were the most normal thing in the world for him. The employees, however, were anything but composed. Whispers rippled through the air, little gasps of shock punctuating the silence. "I thought he was just a janitor." "Where did he even learn this?" "That accent is perfect. He sounds native." But the biggest shock had yet to come. The soft thud of leather shoes on marble echoed from down the hallway, and a subtle shift in the atmosphere signaled the arrival of someone important. The crowd of curious onlookers instinctively straightened, clearing a path toward the lobby as the tall, silver-haired figure Charles Kingston, the CEO himself, stepped into view. His sharp navy suit looked like it had been tailored that morning, his polished shoes catching the light as he strode forward with a kind of quiet authority that made people lower their voices and stand a little taller. He had come expecting to meet the Japanese clients. After all, they were here to discuss a major partnership, but his stride slowed as he noticed the unusual scene before him. His janitor, mop in hand, conversing fluently in Japanese, switching seamlessly into French, surrounded by employees who looked as if they'd just seen a ghost. The CEO's brow furrowed, not in irritation, but in deep, dawning curiosity. For a man like Charles Kingston, used to controlling every variable in his company, surprises were rare. But this was a revelation, standing right in his own lobby. He folded his arms slowly, his gaze fixed on James as if trying to solve a puzzle, and in that instant, everyone watching knew something extraordinary was about to happen. Robert Kingston, the legendary founder and CEO of Kingston Enterprises, was a man who prided himself on being immune to surprises. Over the past 3 decades, he had built his billion-dollar tech empire from nothing but a worn-out laptop and a stubborn refusal to quit, weathering market crashes, hostile takeovers, and the unpredictable chaos of innovation. He had seen brilliant engineers, visionary marketers, and even the occasional eccentric genius walk through his doors, but rarely had anything caught him off guard. Until this moment. Striding into the lobby with his usual purposeful pace, Robert's mind was already racing with the day's agenda. Negotiations with the Japanese clients, a strategy meeting with investors, and an evening dinner with potential partners. But halfway across the polished marble floor, his ears caught a sound so unexpected that he slowed mid-step. He turned his head toward the source and saw James Carter, the company's quiet janitor, speaking rapid, flawless German to a visiting engineer as though it were his native tongue. There was no hesitation, no awkward searching for words, just a steady flow of confident, precise sentences, the kind Robert himself had heard only from seasoned international negotiators. He stopped dead in his tracks, one eyebrow rising ever so slightly, his piercing blue eyes narrowing with intrigue. "James, was that German?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. Around them, the air seemed to still. Even the clicking of keyboards from a nearby reception desk faded into silence. James glanced up from his mop, a faint flush creeping into his cheeks, as if he'd been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. "Yes, sir," he replied with quiet humility. "And, a little French earlier, and Japanese before that." Robert's brow furrowed deeper, curiosity now fully engaged. "How many languages do you speak?" The question hung in the air like a weight, the kind that demanded absolute truth. James hesitated, his gaze dropping for a brief second as though deciding whether to reveal the full extent of his ability. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but soft, the words almost reluctant. 10, sir. English, French, Japanese, German, Spanish, Italian, Russian, Mandarin, Arabic, and Portuguese. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations in the lobby froze mid-sentence. The receptionist, usually composed to the point of being unshakable, leaned back in her chair with her mouth slightly open. The delivery driver from earlier, still holding his clipboard, blinked as though he'd just stepped into another universe. 10. Robert repeated slowly, tasting the number as though trying to confirm it was real. There was no sarcasm in his tone, only the deep, measured cadence of a man who had just stumbled upon something rare and valuable. His eyes locked onto James, as if searching for cracks in the truth, for any sign that this was misunderstanding or a boast. But James didn't flinch. He stood there in his plain blue uniform, hands resting lightly on the mop handle, his expression calm and unassuming. "And you're working here as a janitor?" Robert's voice carried no insult, only genuine confusion. It was the kind of question that contained 1,000 others. Why here? Why this? What happened? James gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "It's an honest job," he said simply. "Pays the bills." There was no bitterness in his tone, no apology, no sense that he was ashamed. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet dignity of a man who didn't see himself as above hard work. The lobby seemed to tighten with anticipation. Every employee watching could sense the subtle shift in their CEO's demeanor. Robert Kingston might have been known for his poker face, but those who had worked under him long enough recognized the signs. The slight tilt of his head, the way his fingers tapped lightly against his folded arms, the sharp glint in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had just discovered an unexpected piece on the chessboard, one that could change the game entirely. And though Robert said nothing more in that moment, those who knew him understood that his silence was not emptiness, but calculation. Somewhere behind that composed expression, gears were turning, strategies forming. The janitor with the mop was no longer invisible. He was now a mystery Robert Kingston intended to solve, and perhaps, if his instincts were right, an asset that could reshape the future of the company in ways no one could yet imagine. Ask ChatGPT. Later that afternoon, long after the buzz in the lobby had quieted and the curious whispers had faded into the usual office chatter, Robert Kingston made a decision. He pressed the intercom and, in his measured, commanding tone, asked the receptionist to send James Carter to his office. When James arrived, he paused at the open doorway, his mop and bucket nowhere in sight, his hands clasped together to hide the faint tremor of nerves. The CEO's office was nothing short of intimidating. A spacious, glass-wall room perched high enough to overlook the city skyline, with minimalist furniture that somehow still radiated authority. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp lines across the polished floor and the gleaming desk where Robert sat, jacket draped over the back of his leather chair. The air in the room felt still, the kind of stillness that made you aware of every breath you took. "James," Robert began, his voice softer than James expected, "how did you learn 10 languages?" For a moment, James just stood there, unsure whether to answer simply or to open a door he hadn't stepped through in years. But then a faint smile touched his lips, not prideful but nostalgic. "I've always loved learning," he said quietly. "Grew up in a tough neighborhood, the kind where trouble found you whether you looked for it or not. The library became my safe place. It smelled like old paper and dust, but to me, it smelled like possibility. I borrowed every book I could, dictionaries, grammar guides, even kids' storybooks in other languages. Later, I found free online courses, watched foreign films with subtitles, listened to music I couldn't understand yet, just so I could feel the rhythm of the words. It wasn't just about speaking another language. It was my escape from everything else going on around me." His voice grew quieter toward the end, and Robert noticed the weight in his words, the unspoken stories tucked between them. "And yet you're working as a janitor," Robert said, not with criticism, but with genuine curiosity, as if asking a riddle he couldn't quite solve. James's eyes flickered downward, and he drew a slow breath before answering. "My mom got sick," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with memory. "Cancer. She was my whole world. I dropped out of college to take care of her full-time, sold my car, worked odd jobs when I could, just to keep the bills paid. After she passed, I didn't have the luxury of chasing dreams. I needed steady work right away. This job came up, and I took it. It wasn't about using my skills. It was about surviving." The room fell silent for a moment, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was a kind of silence that made Robert lean back in his chair, his usually sharp eyes softening just slightly as he regarded the man in front of him. For the first time in years, Robert Kingston felt a jolt of humility. Here was a man with the kind of discipline and self-motivation most people only pretended to have, a man who had quietly built an extraordinary skill set while the world rushed past him. And yet, he was mopping floors, not because he lacked ambition, but because life had demanded sacrifice. Robert saw no arrogance in him, no bitterness, just a quiet resilience that was rare in any field, let alone hidden in plain sight in his own company. For a man like Robert, who had built an empire by spotting potential others overlooked, this was no ordinary conversation. This was the moment he realized he had stumbled upon one of the rarest kinds of talent, the kind forged not by privilege, but by necessity, discipline, and unshakable will keep going no matter the cost. The very next morning, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Kingston Enterprises' main conference room, there was a buzz in the air that employees couldn't quite place. Weekly staff meetings were usually brisk, predictable affairs, project updates, financial figures, a few announcements, but today felt different. When Robert Kingston entered, flanked by his assistant, there was a certain energy in his step, a rare flicker of something almost mischievous in his eyes. He stood at the head of the long, polished table, his presence immediately commanding the room into silence. Clearing his throat, he glanced around, letting the pause linger just long enough to build anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice resonating off the glass walls, "I want to introduce you to someone you've all seen, but maybe never truly noticed." Heads turned as the conference room doors opened, and in stepped James Carter. He was wearing the same navy blue janitor's uniform everyone had seen 100 times before, but today there was something different in the way he carried himself. Shoulders a little straighter, eyes a little brighter, though still tinged with uncertainty. A quiet murmur rippled through the staff, whispers darting across the room like electricity. Robert gestured toward him with an open palm. "This is James Carter," he said, his tone warm but firm. "James speaks 10 languages fluently. 10. And until yesterday, most of us, including me, had no idea." The murmurs grew louder, some people exchanging wide-eyed looks, others shaking their heads as if trying to process the number. 10, one voice whispered in disbelief. Robert let the reaction settle for a moment before continuing. "From today," he announced, turning toward James with a rare, genuine smile, "he will no longer be our janitor. James is now our new international communications coordinator." The words hung in the air for half a second before the meaning truly sank in. "His first task," Robert added, "is to help us expand our business globally, to open doors in places we've only dreamed of, and to connect with our clients in their native languages, building relationships the right way, person to person." The eruption was immediate. Applause broke out. First a few claps, then swelling into a thunderous ovation. Some employees even rose from their chairs, smiling, cheering, calling James's name. The janitor they'd passed every day without a second thought was now stepping into a role that could change the company's entire future. James stood frozen for a moment, the sound of the applause washing over him like a wave. He felt heat rise behind his eyes, and before he could stop it, they welled up. He blinked rapidly, willing the tears not to fall, his lips pressing together in a faint smile of gratitude. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a recognition. The validation that all those years of self-teaching, of staying up late with borrowed library books, of pushing forward when the world told him to stay in his lane, had finally led to this moment. Robert, watching from the head of the table, caught the glimmer in James's eyes, and in a voice that carried both authority and conviction, he added, "Talent should never go unnoticed, no matter where it hides." The room quieted just enough for his words to sink in, the kind of statement that didn't just apply to James, but to everyone in that room, and maybe even beyond. And in that moment, the story of James Carter, the janitor who spoke 10 languages, became more than an office anecdote. It became a reminder that greatness doesn't always wear a suit, and that sometimes the person quietly sweeping the floors is the one most capable of helping you reach the world. In just a few short months, James transformed from the man quietly pushing a mop in the corners of Kingston Enterprises to one of its most indispensable forces, the kind of employee whose name was spoken with respect in boardrooms around the world. His days were no longer spent polishing floors, but navigating the intricate dance of global business with mastery that left even the most seasoned executives in awe. In the mornings, he might be on a crisp, efficient call with partners in China, speaking Mandarin so fluidly that they felt as though they were dealing with a trusted local ally rather than an overseas corporation. By afternoon, he could be deep into a negotiation with clients in Spain, his Spanish warm and persuasive, weaving both charm and precision into his proposals. And when a tense misunderstanding with a Russian supplier threatened to derail a critical deal, James stepped in without hesitation, his flawless Russian and calm demeanor diffusing the tension within minutes. A crisis averted, millions saved, all without the need for a translator. The results spoke for themselves. Kingston Enterprises' international profits didn't just grow, they skyrocketed. Markets that had once been distant possibilities now felt like natural extensions of the company's reach. And Robert Kingston, true to his word, never let a single quarterly report or shareholder meeting go by without making it clear that James Carter was one of the biggest reasons for their success. But for James, the real reward wasn't in the numbers. It was in the moments that reminded him why his journey mattered. One afternoon, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, he strolled through the same marble-floored lobby where his life had changed. His polished shoes clicked against the tiles, and as he passed, employees glanced up with a nod of respect, some still marveling at how far he'd come. Just as he was about to step into the elevator, a young intern, barely out of college, clutching a folder against her chest, hesitated before approaching him. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, her voice carrying that mix of awe and shyness that comes from meeting someone you truly admire. "You inspire me. I used to think my talents wouldn't matter if I didn't have the right job, but you prove that sometimes the right job finds you." James felt a warmth rise in his chest. He smiled, not the polite smile of corporate formalities, but the genuine kind that reaches the eyes. "Your talents always matter," he said gently. "Sometimes the world just needs a little time to see them." The intern's face lit up with a mixture of gratitude and determination, and James knew that, in that small exchange, he had passed on a spark, the same kind of spark Robert had given him. Years later, James would go on to lead Kingston Enterprises' entire global operations division, overseeing teams across continents, shaping strategies that would make the company a household name in places once far beyond their reach. He would travel the world, shake hands with presidents and entrepreneurs, and speak at conferences where people hung on his every word. But no matter how far he rose, he never forgot where he started. And every now and then, as he walked the halls of the company he now helped lead, he would pass by a janitor's cart parked against the wall. Without fail, he would pause, his hand drifting toward the worn handle of the mop, his fingers brushing over it as though it were a relic from another lifetime. In those moments, memories would flood back. The quiet hum of the lobby that morning, the gasp of a coworker hearing him speak Japanese, the sharp glint of curiosity in Robert Kingston's eyes, and the applause that had marked the beginning of everything. He would remember that a mop and a miracle had changed the course of his life forever. Because sometimes, greatness doesn't arrive wearing a suit and a corner office smile. Sometimes it hides behind a name tag, pushes a bucket across a marble floor, and waits, quietly, patiently, for someone to take the time to look closer. And when that happens, it doesn't just change one life. It changes every life it touches.